My name is Sarah Jenkins, and I'm 38 years old. Today, my life is a testament to the fact that God is a good father, even in the midst of unimaginable pain. But to truly understand that, you have to know where I came from. My world was once a beautiful, idyllic place. My husband, Mark, and I lived in a charming, suburban home in Franklin, Tennessee, a town known for its historic charm and strong sense of community. We had a perfect life, and the center of that perfection was our daughter, Lily. Lily was a force of nature, a tiny whirlwind of light and laughter. She had fiery red hair that bounced when she ran, and a smile that could melt the most cynical heart. At 5 years old, she was our world. Our evenings were filled with her recounting her day at preschool, her imaginative stories about a magical kingdom in our backyard, and the simple joy of reading her favorite bedtime stories. I remember one specific evening, just weeks before everything changed, when she ran into the kitchen to show me a drawing. It was a picture of a stick figure family under a bright yellow sun, a messy, crayon-drawn masterpiece that she proudly proclaimed was us. That drawing still hangs on our refrigerator, a sacred relic of a time that feels like a different lifetime. Our family was not just blessed, we were blessed. We were active members of our church, and our faith was an important part of our lives. I believed in God's goodness, in His sovereign plan. I had a prayer journal filled with gratitude and answered prayers. I thought I knew what faith was, but it's easy to have faith when the sun is shining and everything is going your way. I was about to learn that true faith is what happens when the sky is dark and the storm rages. The first sign was a fever. It was a Monday evening, and Lily felt a little warm. We gave her children's Tylenol, and she was her usual, cheerful self the next day. But by Wednesday, the fever was back, and she was unusually lethargic. Her skin took on a strange, mottled appearance, and she was crying about a headache that wouldn't go away. We knew something was terribly wrong. We rushed her to Vanderbilt University Medical Center, just a short drive away in Nashville. I remember the chaos of the emergency room, the sterile smell, the frantic faces of the nurses, and the beeping of machines that would soon become the soundtrack to our worst nightmare. The doctors worked tirelessly, but they couldn't figure out what was happening. Her little body was shutting down. Her blood pressure plummeted, and her vital signs became erratic. The medical team was a blur of hurried whispers and grave expressions. Mark and I stood by her bed, holding her tiny hand, praying harder than we had ever prayed in our lives. We begged God for a miracle. I pleaded with Him, reminding Him that she was only 5, that she was our whole world, that she was His child. I quoted scriptures I had known since childhood, verses about healing and restoration. We believed with every fiber of our being that God would intervene, that He would heal our little girl. But He didn't. At exactly 10:47 p.m. on that horrific Friday night, a team of doctors came into the room and did what they had been trying to do for hours. They looked at us with tears in their eyes and delivered the words no parent should ever have to hear. "I'm so sorry, but there's nothing more we can do. Your daughter is gone." The world went silent. It didn't just stop. It completely shattered into a million tiny, painful pieces. The beeping machines went quiet. The doctors' voices faded away, and all I could hear was the guttural scream that came from deep within my soul. I fell to the floor, my hands and knees trembling on the cold tile. Mark wrapped his arms around me, his own body shaking with sobs. It felt like a cruel cosmic joke. How could a loving God, the same God I had served my whole life, allow this? How could He let the sun set on a 5-year-old's life? In that moment, lying on the cold hospital floor next to the bed where my daughter's body lay, my faith didn't just waver, it completely broke. The God I had known, the God I had praised, felt distant, cruel, and completely absent. All those prayers, all those years of service, felt like they had meant nothing. I had spent my entire life trusting in a God who had just broken my heart into a million irreparable pieces. The anger was a fire in my soul, a burning rage that consumed everything, including my faith. I felt abandoned, betrayed, and utterly alone in a universe that had just stolen the most precious thing I had. But then, as I was engulfed in that despair, an image flashed in my mind. It was a verse from the Bible that I had memorized as a child in Sunday school. Psalm 34, verse 18. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." It wasn't a booming voice from heaven or a miraculous light. It was a whisper in the deepest, most broken part of my soul. It was a small flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness. I didn't believe it yet. I was still crushed, still angry. But for the first time since that night, I didn't feel completely alone. I felt a presence, not a presence of a God who had abandoned me, but a presence of a God who was sitting with me on that cold hospital floor, as heartbroken as I was. It was a small beginning to a long and painful journey back to faith. The funeral for Lily was a blur. My memories of that day are fragmented, a kaleidoscope of weeping faces, black suits, and the suffocating scent of lilies. I remember the weight of the coffin, so small and light, as if it held nothing at all. The eulogies were full of well-meaning platitudes about God's plan and how she was in a better place, but every word felt like a lie. How could this be God's plan? What kind of better place was this, where her laughter was gone forever? I stood there, a hollow shell of a woman, numb to the world. After the funeral, the silence was the worst part. Our home in Franklin, once so full of life, was now a museum of grief. Her toys sat untouched in her room, a permanent monument to a joy that no longer existed. I couldn't bring myself to go in there. The very sight of her pink blanket, or a tiny pair of shoes, felt like a physical blow. The silence in the house was a living, breathing thing. It followed me from room to room, a constant reminder of the voice that was no longer there. Mark and I tried to be there for each other, but our grief was a wedge between us. We were two ships lost at sea, unable to reach one another, each drowning in our own personal oceans of sorrow. My anger at God festered and grew. My prayer journal, once a place of gratitude, became a journal of accusations. I wrote letters to God, filled with rage and doubt, demanding to know why he had done this. I would sit on the couch, staring into a void, asking the same question over and over, why? My once strong faith had withered to nothing, a dry desert where no hope could grow. I couldn't bring myself to go back to church. The thought of singing songs of praise to a God I felt had betrayed me was repulsive. The loving Christian community that had surrounded me now felt like a group of people who couldn't possibly understand my pain. They tried to help, bringing food and offering comfort, but their words felt empty, a well-intentioned but useless balm on a wound that was too deep to heal. One day, as I was sitting on Lily's bed, holding a small teddy bear she used to love, I found a small, handwritten note tucked inside her favorite picture book. It was a note from my mother, placed there years ago. It simply said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The words from Psalm 23 hit me with a force I hadn't expected. It was the same verse my mother had always whispered to me when I was a child and afraid of the dark. Now, I was in a darkness more profound than I had ever known. But for the first time since that terrible night, a tiny flicker of memory broke through the numbness. I remembered my mother, a woman who had faced her own share of hardship, finding comfort in those very words. I didn't immediately believe it. I was still angry, still hurting. But the words were there, a stubborn whisper in the desert of my despair. Over the next few weeks, I began to read the Bible again, not with a heart full of praise, but with a heart full of questions. I started in Psalms, reading every verse of grief, every cry of anger and despair. I saw a God who was not afraid of my anger, a God who heard the brokenhearted. I read about Jesus weeping at the tomb of Lazarus and felt a connection I hadn't felt since before Lily died. He understood grief. He was not a distant, uncaring God, but a God who wept with us. I began to pray again, but my prayers were no longer requests for a miracle. They were raw, honest cries from my soul. I wasn't asking for my daughter back. I was asking God to help me survive the pain. And slowly, in the quiet moments of the day, I began to feel a peace I couldn't explain. It wasn't the absence of pain, but a strength to endure it. It was a grace that met me in my deepest grief, a quiet whisper that said, "I am here. I am with you." That whisper was the first seed of hope planted in the barren ground of my broken heart, a promise that my story wasn't over. The return to life was not a sudden leap, but a series of small, agonizing steps. One day, a few weeks after that small note from my mom, I found myself walking into Lily's room. The sight of her untouched bed, her little stuffed animals, still arranged from the last time she played, was a fresh wound. I collapsed onto the floor, surrounded by her memory, and wept until there were no tears left. But this time, instead of feeling only despair, I felt something else, a strange sense of peace. I began to pick up her toys, to fold her clothes, to touch the things she had touched. I was not trying to erase her, I was trying to hold on to her. I wasn't just Sarah, the grieving mother. I was Sarah, the mother who had been blessed with 5 beautiful years with an angel. This was the beginning of my healing. It wasn't about getting over her death, it was about learning to live with it. I started attending church again, but I sat in the back row, not ready to be seen or to sing. I just needed to be in the presence of God and His people, even if I wasn't fully a part of it yet. I began to talk to my husband, Mark, in a way we hadn't since our loss. We were able to finally share our grief, to cry together, and to hold on to each other as we navigated this new, painful reality. We both began to see that our love for each other was a small piece of the love that God had for us, a love that was strong enough to hold us even in the middle of our brokenness. Slowly, God began to show me that my life was not just about my grief, it was about my gratitude. I began to find small moments of joy in the day again. The warmth of the sun on my face, the sound of a bird singing in the morning, the simple act of holding my husband's hand. I started a new prayer journal, and this time, it wasn't filled with accusations, but with moments of thanksgiving. I was grateful for the 5 years I had with Lily, for the memories, for the lessons, for the love. I began to see that God hadn't given me a broken heart. He had given me a heart that was capable of holding immense love and, in that love, immense pain. I started a small blog, not with the intention of it becoming anything, but simply as an outlet for my grief. I started writing about my journey, about the raw, messy reality of faith in the midst of loss. I wrote about the anger, the tears, the small moments of hope. And to my surprise, people started reading it. Other mothers who had lost children, fathers who were struggling with their own pain, people from all walks of life who were facing their own deserts of despair. My story, once so personal and painful, was beginning to become a source of comfort for others. I began to realize that my pain wasn't just for me. God was using my broken heart to comfort other broken hearts. I started to receive emails and comments from people all over the country, telling me how my words had given them hope, how my honesty had made them feel less alone. This was a new purpose, a new calling. It wasn't a calling I had chosen, but it was one that God had chosen for me, forged in the fires of my grief. I was no longer the woman who had lost her daughter. I was the woman who had found a purpose in her loss, a purpose rooted in the deep, abiding love of a God who had never left my side. As the blog grew, so did my understanding of God's plan. I had always imagined His plan as a straight, clean line. A good life, a happy family, a long and peaceful journey. But the reality was more like a complex, messy tapestry, woven with threads of both joy and sorrow. My daughter's life and her death were threads of sorrow, but they were also threads of beauty, woven into a much larger picture that I was only just beginning to see. I began to share my story more openly, not just on my blog, but also in person. The small church I had once sat in the back of asked me to speak at a women's retreat. The thought was terrifying, but I knew I couldn't say no. I stood in front of a room full of women, my heart pounding in my chest, and I told them my story. I spoke about the anger, the doubt, the desert of despair. I spoke about the moments I wanted to give up, and the small, stubborn whispers of grace that kept me going. I didn't sugarcoat the pain or pretend to have all the answers. I simply offered my raw, honest testimony of a God who meets us in our lowest moments. Afterward, a woman came up to me, her eyes filled with tears. She told me she had lost her son 2 years ago and had been living in a silent world of grief and shame. She felt like she had lost her faith and was afraid to admit it to anyone. My story had given her permission to be honest with her pain and to start her own journey back to God. In that moment, I understood that my grief was not just mine alone. It was a bridge to others, a way to connect with a depth of human experience that is only found in loss. My relationship with my husband, Mark, was also part of this new tapestry. Our shared grief, which had once felt like a chasm between us, was now a bond forged in fire. We found a new kind of love for each other, a deeper, more resilient love that had weathered the worst storm imaginable. We found a new way to honor Lily's memory, not just with tears, but with action. We started a small foundation in her name to provide resources for other families at Vanderbilt University Medical Center who were facing sudden, critical illness in their children. It was our way of taking a piece of our heartbreak and turning it into something good, something that would honor the light that she had brought into our lives. My journey from grief to purpose was a slow, deliberate walk. It wasn't about erasing the pain of losing Lily, but about learning to carry it with grace. I learned that faith wasn't about God protecting me from all hurt, but about Him walking with me through it. I learned that my life was not just about the length of my days, but about the depth of my love and the purpose I found in the middle of my pain. Lily's life, though tragically short, was not in vain. Her memory, and the story of how God comforted me in my grief, became a beacon for others, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest valleys, God is present. Today, our home in Franklin, Tennessee, is no longer a museum of grief. It is a home filled with life, love, and a profound sense of peace. The empty ache in my heart will always be there, but it is no longer the defining part of who I am. It is now a quiet reminder of a love so deep that it transcends even death. My husband, Mark, and I have found a new rhythm, a new way to live and love. We talk about Lily all the time, not with tears of sorrow, but with smiles of gratitude for the beautiful gift she was. Her spirit lives on in our hearts, in our foundation, and in the countless lives her story has touched. My journey through grief has taught me that God's presence is not always a miraculous rescue from pain, but a faithful companion through it. He didn't spare me from the heartbreak, but He held me in the middle of it. He took my broken heart, my anger, and my shattered faith, and He gently put the pieces back together, not as they were before, but as a new creation, stronger, more empathetic, and with a purpose I never could have imagined. I am not the same woman I was before Lily's death, and for that, I am eternally grateful. The old me, the woman who believed faith was an easy road, is gone. The new me, the woman who knows faith is a lifeline in the storm, has been born. To anyone who is walking through a valley of grief, I want to tell you this: you are not alone. Your pain is real, your anger is valid, and your questions are heard. God is not afraid of your honest heart. He is not a distant, uncaring God, but a God who sits with you in the ashes, who weeps with you, and who is ready to carry you when you are too weak to walk. You may feel like your world has shattered into a million pieces, but I promise you that God can take those pieces and weave a new tapestry, a new legacy of hope and healing. Your story, your pain, is not the end. It is a new beginning. My life, which once felt over, is now just beginning. I am a living testimony to the promise in 2 Corinthians 1 verse 4. He comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. Lily's beautiful 5 years of life were a gift, and her memory is a living legacy of God's comfort and redemption. Thank you for listening to my story. If my words have resonated with you, I invite you to follow our channel and find more stories of hope and healing. Subscribe to our channel and help us share the power of God's love and comfort.